In this 001 Game Creator video tutorial series, we'll be covering how to create your own custom resources for use in your games. In this first part of our ongoing series, we'll be looking specifically at the Sprite Editor and learning how to create 2D character sprites, stop frame and keyframe animations, and even particle effects. Please note that while we will be using the Action RPG template throughout this series, the lessons learned are not specifically RPG related and can in fact be applied to any number of game genres. For our first sprite, we're going to recreate the default male sprite to learn how it's put together. First, start by opening the Sprite Editor by clicking on the Sprites button from the main toolbar. Then click on the Add Resource button from the top left of the window, select Body, and click OK. Let's give our sprite a new name by typing it in the Display Name text box at the top. I've simply named mine Male 2. We can ignore these options to the left for now and skip straight to the Poses section at the bottom. Put simply, a pose represents a unique state for our sprite, with different animations for each of them. You'll notice that several poses, such as walking and slashing, already have blank animations created for them, distinguishable by their bold text. Not only that, but several directions have blank animations set up as well, which we can see thanks to these small circles on the up, right and down positions. However, without any frames, these animations serve little purpose, so let's fix that. With the walking pose and down direction selected, click on the green plus icon for the body and far arm animation layer, and select either blank images for if you intend to use the built-in graphic editor to create your own graphics, image files to insert existing graphic files stored on your computer, or image strip to insert an existing sprite sheet with all of its animation frames already created. For this tutorial, we'll be using the same frames as the default male sprite for convenience. Each new graphic you create or insert will become a frame in your animation. The more frames an animation has, the smoother it typically becomes. For our walking animation, we've used 6 unique frames. By now, you've no doubt noticed that there are 2 separate animation layers for each pose and direction, one for the body and far arm, and the other for the close arm. The reason for doing this is so that we can animate the arms independently from the body, but more importantly, it allows us to render the arms on top of the body animation layer. This is achieved through the render layer setting, which is currently set to 90 for our close arm layer, with the body and far arm layer being set to 0. This number determines which order the animation layer will be rendered at, with higher values being on top and lower values being behind. Like before, create or insert a new graphic for each frame of your close arm animation, so that our body sprite isn't walking around armless. For this tutorial, we'll once again be using the same frames as the default male sprite. Now that we have all of our frames in place, we can preview our animation by clicking on the Preview Continuously button just above the sprite preview window. It looks good, but it's moving a little too fast for my liking. To slow down the animation, click and drag to select all of your frames within your animation, and then set the frame time to 0.15 seconds. Repeat this for the close arm animation layer to ensure that frames play back at the same rate. That looks better. Now that we've learned how to set up a walking animation, we can repeat these steps for the right and up direction, so that our sprite can walk freely in all directions. Don't worry about the left direction, as 001 will automatically flip the right direction if no left animation graphic is present. Now let's take a look at collision boxes and holding points. A collision box is an invisible area around your sprite which is used for real-time collision detection, whereas a holding point is a marker that tells 001 where an item should be held. To set both of these up, click on the Sequence and Collision button, or just click directly inside the preview window itself to launch the Sequence Editor. Feel free to adjust the size of the default collision box to better fit the shape of your sprite, or replace it entirely with a different type of collision. Rectangle collisions are used by default, but you can also create polygonal, spherical, and mesh collisions as well, the latter of which is used exclusively for 3D sprites. Each collision shape has its own strengths and weaknesses. For example, the polygon collision allows for far greater precision than that of either the rectangle or spherical shapes, but it is also the most performance intensive. For this tutorial, we'll be leaving the default collision box as it is, and moving straight onto setting up our sprite's holding points. To create a new holding point, click on the first of 4 holding point buttons at the top, and then click on your sprite where you want an item to be held. I've placed mine in the sprite's left hand. You can use the middle mouse button to pan around the sequence editor, and use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out if this makes things easier. Use the track bar at the bottom to step through each frame of your animation and adjust the position of your holding point accordingly, so that it follows the movement of the sprite's hand. You can also use the rotation tools to rotate the holding point as well. For finer precision, use the position text boxes and rotation dials to move and rotate the holding point a few pixels at a time. The rotation dials will also snap to angles if you hold down the Shift key while making any changes. Once you're satisfied with the positioning, we can preview what a held item will actually look like by clicking on the More button and selecting an item from the first drop-down menu. I've selected the Energy Sword. Feel free to play your animation and make any adjustments. A pose can have up to 4 separate holding points, which you can use to hold a weapon in one hand, a shield in another, and even have something like a bow on the sprite's back. It's entirely up to you. Don't forget to adjust your holding points for the right and up directions too. With our walking pose now complete, let's quickly set up an idle pose. This will essentially be our sprite's default pose. While we could create an animation, like our walking pose, it's easier to just use a single frame instead. Remember to create or insert a new graphic for the down, right and up directions, and adjust your holding points as needed. We don't need to worry about changing the frame time here, since it's only a single frame that is looped repeatedly. Now let's try creating a slightly different pose. For this we're going to create a slashing pose, which will automatically play whenever an actor uses a melee weapon. For this pose, we once again set up our frames like we did for the walking pose, ensuring there are unique frames for both animation layers for the down, right and up directions, and that the frame time is set to 0.15 seconds, while also setting up and adjusting our holding points. There is one key difference this time, however, and that is its sequence mode. For both the walking and idle poses, we left this as loop, but for our slashing pose, we need to set this to once instead, since an attacking animation typically only plays once in between button presses. The shooting pose also needs to be set up the same way, and works in a similar fashion to our slashing pose, except this pose will be used for any ranged attacks. We'll also take this opportunity to briefly talk about bullet points. A bullet point works in a similar way to a holding point, except it tells 001 the location where a projectile should spawn. If no bullet point is specified, 001 will simply use the position of the holding point instead. In addition to being able to create separate animation layers, you can also create entirely new sprites that are layered on top of existing ones, like clothing. The steps involved are fairly similar to what we've already been doing, and there are several presets already available for things like shirts, pants, hair, etc. that you can select when creating a new sprite or selecting a new category. You don't need to set up holding points or bullet points for these sprites, because the body sprite already has them set up. We've now successfully created our first character sprite with walking, idle, slashing and shooting animations. The type of animations we've created for our sprites so far are typically referred to as stop frame animation, in which still frames are pieced together to create a sense of movement. But there's another type of animation we can create in 001, known as keyframe animation, where we simply set up 2 or more keyframes and have 001 fill in the rest for us. To demonstrate this, we're going to create a new sprite that will display a pulsating logo. Create a new sprite, select the graphic preset and click OK. This preset automatically enables the rotate graphic with direction option, which sets a singular direction, as well as the billboard option, which will draw the sprite upright regardless of the orientation of the camera. Now click on the green plus icon and create or insert your logo as a new frame. For this tutorial, I'll be using the 001 logo itself from a local file on my computer. Set the pose length to 3, and then set the pose rate to 0.5 seconds. Then open the Sequence Editor by clicking on the Sequence and Collision button, or by clicking directly inside the preview window itself. Click on the Interface tab to preview the sprite from an interface's perspective, as we'll likely be placing this logo on an interface, and then use the trackbar at the bottom to select the second frame. Now click on the logo itself, and set the X and Y magnification value from the panel to the left to 50. Then move the trackbar to the last frame, and set the X and Y magnification back to 100, so that the first and last frame are the same. Click on the Preview Continuously button to preview the animation. With minimal effort, we've been able to create a smooth, pulsating logo animation. You can also alter the position, rotation, colour, and opacity of the logo with similar ease to create a variety of cool effects. For an even better look, click on the Show Grid button at the top to toggle the grid off, and click on the Background Colour button to set the background colour to white. Before we conclude this tutorial, there's one last thing we want to touch on, and that's particle effects. These sprites can be used to replicate things like smoke, water splashes, flames, or other visual effects without needing to manually draw each new frame. For this tutorial, we're going to create a simple smoke particle. To do this, start by creating a new sprite and select the graphic preset once again. Then create or insert a smoke graphic that will be used to create our particle effect. Tick the particle generation checkbox and then click on the particle options button to open the particle generation window. To make a convincing looking smoke effect, we'll need to change the following settings. First, set the frequency to 0.05 seconds, which is the rate at which new particles are generated, while leaving the lifetime amount at 1 second, which is the total amount of time the particle effect stays on screen. Next, set the minimum and maximum starting size to 12% and 15% respectively, which will spawn the particles at a variably small size, but not exactly the same size, and within the range you have set. Then set the minimum and maximum size change to 100% each, which will cause the particles to enlarge at an even rate over its lifetime. Now set the maximum starting distance x and starting distance y to 16. When a particle spawns, 001 will choose a value between 0 and 16 for both the x and y coordinates, so particles aren't all spawning from the same exact position. Set the minimum and maximum starting speed y to -1 and 1 respectively, and the minimum and maximum starting speed z to 2 and 8 respectively. This will change how quickly the smoke rises. Set the minimum and maximum speed change z value to 8 each, so that the initially slow starting smoke particles speed up by the end of their lifetime. Finally, set the minimum and maximum starting opacity to 0 by dragging the trackbar all the way to the left, and then set the minimum ending color to grey, so that the color of the smoke particles is varied. And that should just about do it. Click on the 45° tab to preview the sprite like how it'll appear in game, and then click on the preview continuously button to see your smoke particle effect in action. It looks pretty convincing, if I do say so myself. We've barely scratched the surface on what you can do with particle generation, as there are countless possibilities, but hopefully this gives you some idea of how to put one together. Feel free to tweak the other settings to create even more dazzling effects. This concludes the first part of our resource video tutorial series. In future videos, we'll be looking into how to create other resources, including tilesets and items. If you enjoyed this video tutorial and would like to see more like it in the future, then please let us know in the comment section below, along with your suggestions for other topics you'd like to see covered.